Hello everyone and welcome to It's Time to Get Your Photos Organized. My name is Caroline Guntur and I'm a certified photo organizer and your host today. If you haven't already visited me over at organizingphotos.net, be sure to stop by there after this webinar is over. Today I'm going to be walking you through some introductory projects that you can tackle as a beginner when you get started with your photo organizing. And I'm here to inspire you and motivate you to try and get your photos organized for yourself. It can be a really fun process, but there's usually a lot of things that pop up in the initial phase, a lot of questions. So hopefully this webinar will answer those questions for you. And if not, please reach out to me and I will point you in the right direction. So let's get started. As I said, I'm a certified photo organizer, and when I'm not up to my elbows in digital organizing strategies, you can find me working on my own family history projects and enjoying quality time with my family. I am a huge fan of family history and genealogy in general. It's something that I truly enjoy, and it is my passion. So to help other people with their photos is really a dream come true. And I always start my webinars and presentations by reflecting on why we take photos in the first place. Because it is really easy to get caught up in the how-tos and the must-dos of the day-to-day photo management that it's sometimes easy to forget why we have those photos in the first place. So it is to remember important people, to remember important life events, and to tell the stories of our lives. Photos are meant to be shared, they're meant to be enjoyed. That is why we take them in the first place. And what I often find is that we click away and then we never go back and revisit those photos anymore. It used to be a little bit different when we had 24 exposures or less. We were more mindful of what we clicked. But in the past 10 years, things have just changed so quickly that it has become very difficult to manage everything. And that's why I have a full-time job, to be honest, to help people with all of that overwhelm and that overflow of photos. But always come back to this why. This is why we take photos, and that is why it's important to curate your collection and to take care of it for the next generation, really to preserve what was important to us. And so before we get into more of the practical tips, I want to share this photo with you, and I want you to look at this very carefully. This is the most important photo in my collection. And you can see me there on the left with my parents and my husband and daughter on the right there with his parents. And off the top, this might just look like a regular snapshot. You know, there's nothing special about this photo. There's nothing particularly amazing about it in general. It's just a regular snapshot. But the reason it's important to me is that my parents live in Sweden and my husband's parents live in India. And this photo actually represents the only time they have ever been together in the same place at the same time. That's quite a distance apart, and my husband and I live here in the United States at the moment, and so we are a very scattered family, and we actually don't get to see each other very often. And this is actually the only time my mother and father-in-law have been to Sweden to visit my parents. My mother visited India once, but my dad was not able to come on that trip. And so this is really the only photo I have of all of my daughter's grandparents together. And I think that is truly important. So oftentimes when clients come to me, it's because they have a photo like this, but they say, you know what, Caroline, I can't find it. And that's what prompted me to call you. It's that one photo. I know I have it somewhere, but I don't know where to look for it. I'm scared that I'm going to lose it. And that is almost what happened to me. When this photo was taken, I was actually working as a photographer. I thought that I was doing everything right, but that was not the case. And one day, well, you guessed it, we had tech failure. And I remember just feeling sick to my stomach and not being able to breathe, just worrying about this one photo. I felt so ashamed that I hadn't really looked up how to back things up correctly. I didn't know what to do. But fortunately, we were able to do a very extensive recovery rescue effort, and I got my photo back. But that could easily have gone the other way, and I would not have been able to forgive myself. And so I want you to think about what photo means that much to you, because that is your motivation for getting organized. And that turned into a career for me, and now I get to help others. So my mission now is to keep photos everywhere safe, and I now get to do this for a living, which is just amazing. And I want to show you what an organized collection looks like up front, so that you know if you are on point or if you have a little bit of work to do. Because, everybody's definition of organized looks a little bit different. To me, as a professional, it means that your photos are gathered in one place. It means that you have archival or safe storage. So depending on if you're doing print or digital. It means that the stories behind the photos are preserved. It means that print photos are digitized and all of them are backed up, print and digital. And to me, it also means that you can find the photo you need within a minute or two. If it takes you 5 minutes or longer, then we could always improve it. If you can't find it at all, we definitely need to improve it. And then finally, shared with family and friends. We know that we want our photos to be shared and enjoyed and celebrated. And so an organized photo collection will let you accomplish that very easily. So to sum up, it really doesn't necessarily matter if you're storing your photos in binders or boxes, as long as that storage is safe. I hope that makes sense. As long as it sort of ticks all of these criteria, then I would consider that collection organized. So I want you to set your criteria like this, and feel free to swipe my list here or make your own, but set some of those goals and see if you can get to that point. So on the flip side of this, I want to talk about what a disorganized photo collection looks like in my view. And to me, this means that prints are not stored properly. You can see here on the left, here's an example of a client box that I received recently. To me, I would not consider that organized, because we see that the prints are just in a big mess. You can see that they're bent. There's no clear idea of where anything is, and they're just not safe at this point. For digital photos, it could mean that they're scattered on multiple devices and you're just having trouble consolidating. One big thing about consolidation is that it lets you back things up. And so if it's scattered everywhere, it's very hard to do that. And we see that very often with digital photos. It could also mean that photos are stuck inside proprietary software that's outdated. So perhaps you have old libraries that are not supported anymore, and you're not sure how to get your photos out of there. That could happen. There are some really good systems out there that are proprietary software that your photos could be in, and that's not really what I'm talking about here. I mean outdated, mainly. So we've seen a couple of photo programs come and go, and if you're still working with those programs, that's a good reason to upgrade. Another thing that I like to see is an organization system. So if there's no consistent organization system, then that would be considered disorganized to me. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean the type of system you have, just the fact that there should be a system. There should be, if you rename your files, that could be one system. If you put them in folders or albums, that could be something else. So the system that you set up can look differently. This is not sort of the how of that part. This is the fact that it exists. And that's what I mean. And the same thing with backing up. Just the fact that you are backing up is a big accomplishment. And then the way in which you do it can always be improved. But if your collection is not backed up at all, then I would consider that very dangerous and very disorganized. And then, of course, all of this contributes to the fact that that one photo is impossible to find. And so if you feel like it would take you a very long time to find the photo that you want, then I would consider to make some improvements onto your system. But where do you start? It seems like such a daunting task, right? Well, I always tell the clients this. What would have the most impact for you? And that doesn't necessarily have to be the actual organizing step. You know, as you just saw, there are a lot more things that go into the entire photo system. And so if I could wave a magic wand for you, what change would be the first one that you would wish for? In my opinion, that is photo storage. And again, people may disagree with me on this, and that's fine. I believe that having the correct photo storage is one of the most important things that you can do for your photo collection. So for prints, that means storing your memories in archival boxes for long-term preservation. We want to make sure that the photo boxes are safe for the photos, and again, that they don't end up in that photo I showed you earlier where it's just sort of a big jumble. You want to make sure that they're stored flat, they're stored in a way that doesn't further degrade or damage them. And specifically for printed photos, there's a lot you can do with that. So if you take a look at this photo right here, this is an example of those old magnetic albums that once upon a time were really great. We all thought they were amazing because you put the photo in, it stuck there, and you sort of flipped over that transparent plastic leaf, and the photo stuck, and it was very easy to take photos in and out. Well, when they sit for decades and decades, it turns out that the photos get stuck to them. And it's very difficult to get the photos out without damaging them. And those magnetic albums are just horrible for your photos. So we want to try and get the photos out of those if possible. Here are another two examples of some storage that isn't necessarily the best. So on the left here, you can see boxes and boxes of just stuff and all sorts of things thrown together with no organization system or anything like that. And the boxes that they're in are plastic. They're not archival. In the case of the slides there on the top right, you can see that it's just a very old dingy box, and it's just not good for the photos at all. On the right there, you see a damaged photo, all muddy from water damage. We definitely don't want to see anything like that. Here's another example of a project that I worked on not too long ago. And as you can see, that was a very big project. They had a lot of photos in general. However, those photos were not stored by category. They were not stored in archival boxes, nothing like that. It was really just more of a moving situation, and we definitely want to see to it that all of those photos are categorized and nicely put into archival boxes. Not only does it consolidate and actually cut down on the amount of storage you need, but it just keeps your photos safe overall. So here's what we like to see. And again, I want to stress that just because you put your photos in archival boxes doesn't necessarily mean that you have to organize them. Can you? Of course. And that's actually what we want you to do. Obviously, we want you to be able to find what you're looking for. But if you can only do one thing, I would rather that you just store them in archival boxes, and then we can always get to the organization at a later point. So what I like to do is order these really good, safe archival boxes. These in particular are coming from Native Archival, but there are many other vendors out there on the market that you can buy these from. Archival Methods is really great. We have Gaylord Archival and a few others. Again, Native Archival is where I get mine, and those boxes are just really great. They hold about 2,400 photos, I want to say, for the big one, and I think 1,600 or 1,800 something in the small one, and that's just a lot of photos that you can fit in a big box. So it just consolidates everything really, really nicely. So my point is, again, if you can't get to the organization part, at least store your collection safely so that we don't degrade it further. So that for me is usually one of those beginning steps that is sort of easier to accomplish. It doesn't take a whole lot of time for you to do that, and it also doesn't cost you a fortune to be able to get that done. So if you can only get to that part, that alone will take care of a lot of things. So For printed photos, you want to look for media storage that's archival safe again, preferably with a dark interior that keeps the photos really nicely protected from light. If you can get to an organizational system, that's also great. But again, just storing them is amazing. And then, of course, the boxes should be complementary to your lifestyle. So, if you can store smaller boxes as opposed to big boxes, and depending on how you live, where you live, and what your lifestyle looks like, you can pick something that works for you. And when it comes to archival, there's one thing you should know about, and that's the PAT testing. PAT stands for Photographic Activity Test, and that is basically a voluntary manufacturer test. So what happens is when a manufacturer creates an archival product, they submit that for review to the Permanence Institute, and then they get that stamp if the product passes, which really means that the product has been tested to professional standards and that it's truly archival. A lot of the time we see phrases like photo safe and suggested for archival use and things like that. That doesn't necessarily mean it is that type of quality. So if you see that stamp that says PAT tested or PAT compliant, that means that it has been tested and it's actually very good quality. So look for that. And if you see a manufacturer with a great product that it doesn't say that, you can always call them and ask, has this been PAT tested? Usually they want to put that stamp on there if they have it, because that's, another selling point. But not everybody will print that on there. So just make sure that you look, and if it comes down to picking something with it versus without it, pick the one that's with it. Okay, so let's move on to photo scanning. That's obviously another project. This tends to be a bigger project, and so it might not necessarily be the first one that you take on, but it's certainly something I want to talk about because we want to digitize our photos, our slides, our negatives, so that we can enjoy them again, get them back into our lives, and use them in modern projects. So here are, again, some client photos that I have taken. And as you can see there on the left, we've got negatives in plastic bins and bags. And that is not a great way to store negatives. Same thing with the Walgreens picture CDs there. They can easily scratch. They can easily get broken. We don't want to store things like that. And with the slides, you can see that I received just a bag full of slides, and there is no system. They're not safe. We want to make sure we store those safely so that we can actually get to the scanning. And again, on the bottom here, you have some of those envelopes that the photos used to come in. And again, it would be a huge task to go through and find the photo that you needed in all of those. So we can definitely make some improvements here with storage. That would be my first suggestion. The second one would be to get them scanned so that we have a digital version and we can back them up. And that can take on its own life. It's usually a big project, but I want to remind you that those are real photos. So look here what came out of that bag of slides. This was my client's mother on vacation in Hawaii in 1959, photos that he had never seen before, and it was just amazing to be able to share those with him. So definitely get your photos scanned if you can. You will find some treasures in those boxes and bins. So when you look for a vendor to get your scanning done, there are a couple things that you want to check for. So the first thing you want to ask is, what format will you receive? I scan in TIFF, and then I also export to JPEG, and we usually recommend getting a combination of TIFF files and JPEGs, and there's really nothing wrong with either one. TIFF files are more, for lack of a better word, archival quality. They're higher in storage. They're higher in the amount of storage that take up, so they can be a little bit more expensive to store if you have to buy bigger drives, but they really are very, very good to scan in because you can edit them and without them degrading, for example. JPEGs are what we most commonly see because that is the most universal, the most common format that's out there. And again, there's nothing wrong with getting your photos in JPEG format too, but you want to make sure that if they offer you tips as well, that you get the best version of the photo that you can. Sometimes I like to give customers both, or sometimes they will request one or the other, but make sure you understand the differences between those formats and make sure that you understand what format you will be receiving. The same thing is common in terms of resolution. So sometimes we see photo scanning service that give you a fairly low quality resolution on your photos. And we want to make sure we know what DPI or PPI or whatever the project calls for, that we know what that means. It basically means the resolution of the photo. And 300 is standard. We always scan at minimum 600, but there are vendors out there that will go higher. So make sure you talk to your vendor and understand these terms so that you can understand what you're getting. You also might want to ask what equipment they're using. You know, are they using a flatbed scanner? Are they using camera scanning, which is common nowadays? Make sure that it's good quality equipment that's being used. And also, how will you receive it? Will you be getting an external hard drive, a flash drive? Will you be getting it in the cloud? You know, downloading a lot of files could take a long time, so make sure you understand and that fits what your project calls for. And the biggest thing, I think, is you want to ask, do the photos get sent somewhere? So a lot of vendors, unfortunately, mail photos to other places, other countries even sometimes, get them scanned there, and then they mail them back. And it's not something that I am a fan of because I always want photos to stay as locally as possible. I don't like things possibly getting lost in the mail. And so that's definitely something that you want to make sure that you ask so that you're comfortable with that. And a lot of the same things go for media conversion. You know, convert your old film reels, your old tapes to share with the younger generation. My daughter's 13 and I don't think she even knows what a VHS tape is, which is quite hilarious to me. But so it can be really fun to share these old reels and tapes with the younger people in your life. Again, so here are some client examples that we have. You can see the box on the right there has all of the film reels, but it's really not stored well. It's not in any type of order. Who knows what's on them, you know, and they can easily get damaged. We don't want that. We want to make sure we remedy that as quickly as possible. And again, make sure that, you know, you think about the fact that these are actually memories. They're not just, you know, these old formats. They actually have really priceless memories on them. So it can be really, really fun to bring those back into your life. So a lot of the same things go for, you know, when you ask a digitization vendor about your reels and tapes, it's kind of the same thing as with the other scanning, is what format will you be receiving? I usually recommend AVI files and MP4 files. Same kind of issue as with TIFF and JPEG. You want to know what format you're getting and why. You want to know what type of equipment is being used. If you've ever looked at a film reel, you know that it has sprockets on the side, those little holes on the side of the film. Those are for the machine to grip the film and push it forward. But as film ages, it tends to shrink and get more brittle. And so if they are using sprocketed machines to pull at those sprockets to move the film forward, you know, if it's a delicate film, then it could rip, and we don't want that. So we want, ideally, sprocketless machines to move the film forward. So make sure that you ask the vendor that you're using what type of equipment's being used for that. Also ask, again, how you will receive it. Flash drive, cloud, hard drive. You want to make sure that that adds up with what you need. And again, does the media get sent somewhere? we want to try and avoid that as much as possible. All right, so let's talk about photo organization, because now that you understand how to store your photos correctly in your media, you understand that eventually, as best you can, you should get it scanned and digitized. It's also really important to organize it. And the reason we want to organize it is so that we can find what we're looking for. Because again, if you had only 10 photos, we wouldn't need to do much with them. It would be very easy to find things. But we regularly see photo collections now that, approach hundreds of thousands of photos. I've even seen up towards 1 million and more. It's not the average size of the library. I would say the average family probably has something between 60 and 80,000 files, but that's still a lot. So the more we can organize our photos, the better. It'll be easier for us to find what we're looking for and be able to enjoy it better. And that's why we want to do that. So again, there are many ways to organize. So not all ways will necessarily resonate with you, but certainly keywords and categories are two things that we can input to make it a little bit faster. And here's another client example. Again, what we're trying to avoid is that we just have this long, giant list of thousands of photos with no name that makes sense, and with no categories, no keywords, and just having to browse thousands of files is not really the best use of our time. So that's what we're trying to get away from. Now, can you store your photos only in your operating system? Of course. You can make a few folders, you can put in some keywords. That can easily be done in any operating system. So you don't necessarily need a fancy software to be able to do any of this. But with a software, there are more things that you can do, and it becomes a little bit more fun and more time efficient to do it that way. Here's an example of a client's library that we did. This was a client that just wanted photos in folders in the operating system, and that's totally okay with me. He was big on traveling, and so he had all of these locations that he had been to, and that's really how he wanted to look for his photos. He just wanted to be able to browse the place that he went, and that was pretty much it. And so it was really easy to throw all the photos in different folders there and sort of have that rough organization done. We also put some keywords on them so that he could also search for those files in the same way. But that was just a very nice and easy outline for him. We call them a core file structure that he was very happy with. So this doesn't have to be complicated. If you want to take it up a notch, you could go to a photo organizing program like Apple Photos, Adobe Lightroom, Adobe Bridge, Mylio, AC/DC, any of the ones that are out there that treat your photos well. We can definitely use those and leverage those the best way possible. And we can also then make your photos available on your phone. So that you can have them with you when you're out and about and traveling and show them to friends and things like that. So do you have to do that? No. You can have a basic core folder structure in your operating system. But again, if you want to enjoy your photos a little bit more and do some fun things with them, we would recommend having a good photo management program as well. Another thing with organization that is really great to do is to make a family cloud archive. And I do these all the time for clients. It's really fun because it becomes a lot more shareable with the friends and family right away. So on top there, you see an archive from Forever that I did for a client recently. And on the bottom here, we have an example from SmugMug. There are many different platforms out there that can be used for that. There are many different platforms that can be used for cloud archives. And what we want you to look for are places like Forever that treat your photos right. And basically what you upload comes back out if you download it. A lot of cloud storage sites aren't that generous. So if you had a bunch of keywords, sometimes they don't show up online. And if you download the photo again, sometimes that gets stripped out, that information. We want to make sure that we set you up on a cloud archive that protects your photos and helps you with that long-term preservation goal. But they can certainly be another way to organize your photos little by little so that you can, again, share them with family and friends really easily. And I want to stress that organization is really about you. So don't worry too much about what you should be doing or what other people are doing. Organization is all about how you search, find, and retrieve photos. So think about what types of organization techniques you're interested in, right? Do you like to search for photos or would you rather browse for photos? And how do you remember things? For example, do you remember photos based on where you went? Then it would make a lot of sense to organize those photos by location and put some location tags on them. And if you really love looking for people, if you work with people a lot, if you have a big family, you might want to do facial recognition because that will let you find people very, very easily. If you think about when something was taken, if you remember the exact dates when things were taken, maybe a chronological file structure would be for you. So I don't want you to worry too much about what other people are doing again or what it should look like. I want you to think about how you would prefer to find your photos, and that will sort of lead you to the right solution. All right, so I also want to mention photo restoration because so often we see old photos that are faded or just damaged or maybe broken by accident. We don't have to throw those types of photos away. With modern techniques, it's very easy to digitally restore a photo back to life, and it can be really fun to get those old photos back in your life. So if you come across photos like that in your photo collection, don't worry about that too much. Just find a pro that can fix that for you. And that's usually not too expensive to do, and it can make a world of difference. So I want to give you some inspiration with a few projects that I've done lately. So here's an example of a client photo that we took. This was an oversized photo, but it was the only one that the client had of a Christmas morning where she and all of her family members opened presents and got their toys. And you can see here around the edges, it's very faded. It was water damaged at one point, and it had been rolled. It just had not been stored well. And since this was the only photo that she had, she wondered if we could bring it back to life. And so here is the after. And again, you can see that it's a big, big difference there. Is it perfect? No. This photo was just very, very damaged, and this is the best that we could do, but it's still a major improvement over what she had. And so I really want you to see that it's possible to bring a lot of these details back, with digital restoration. Here is another photo. That is my client there, the little girl, and she's with her mother and sister, and they're at the beach. And this was actually a photo that was fairly small, and it was stuck to glass. So I don't know if you can tell, but we had to scan through the glass. It's actually stuck to the glass. You can see a little bit on the bottom there. If I had tried to take the glass off of this photo, it would have ripped. It just would not have come off, and this was the only way to to get a good scan of it. So we scanned through the glass, and you can see on the right there that there is just enough color for us to be able to sample what the original colors were. So we were able to restore this photo into a color version. Is it perfect? No. But again, it's a huge improvement over what she had. Huge improvement. So here it is again, before and after. This was a tricky one because you can see that there's movement in the photo. And obviously with the waves and the sand and her sister running, there's a lot going on there. It's difficult to restore that. But again, at least you can see the details of the people a little bit better. And it's just more fun to see the colored version as well. We also made a black and white version for her that she could blow up and frame. So that was a really fun project. And, sometimes when you have special photos like that, being able to print them out and put them on your wall again just makes a huge difference in somebody's life. Let's also talk about family history projects because a lot of us are doing those. It's very popular to do that, and it's just so much more fun if you include photos. So I want to give you some examples of things that we've done with that. Many of you are probably working on your genealogy projects and you've come across pictures like this all the time, or documents, I should say, like this all the time. So a census record, maybe a land record, things like that. Those are super fun to pull into your projects, but I also don't want you to forget about your old photos. So if there's an ancestor you're working on that you have a photo of, that is so much fun to actually take that photo and get that into your family project, your reports, and your family history books. Here's an example of what that could look like. If you have photos like this, then we can definitely do a lot with those. So one of my clients had this photo in her collection, and we were actually able to take that photo and put that into the report that we did for her, which was really, really cool. So if you're working on your family trees and all those things, we definitely want to match that up to the documents. We want to put a face to the name. It brings it to life so much better. And we were also able to take all of these photos that were scanned then and put that into the actual family tree, which would then go on the wall. And again, a family tree just comes to life so much more when there's photos attached to a name. So I really, really would encourage you to look at what photos you have that you can place in your family trees and your family history books. It just brightens it up so much more. So how do you do all this? If I had a nickel for every time somebody asked me that. Depending on what you're doing, obviously, it's not going to be a project that's done overnight. It is going to take some time, and that's okay. So what I want you to focus on is, again, what would make the most difference right now? What would be the biggest thing that you could accomplish that would move the needle for you? And a lot of the time, that is just in the way things are stored. And then we can go back and we can start organizing little by little. But if you can get to the organization part, that's obviously a goal. If you can get to the scanning part, that's obviously a goal. We want to make sure that we get to all of that eventually, not just in one day. So what I want you to do is approach your project like you do any other. So it doesn't matter what type of project you're working on, right? If you're painting your house or if you're scanning photos, it's still a project, and project management doesn't necessarily change. Only tasks change, right? What needs to happen. Projects are managed the same way, regardless of what they are. So think of it as any other project, and you've probably done a million projects in your life, so you kind of already know how to do that. So number one, obviously, determine the goal. What's the outcome here that we're looking for? And then backtrack what needs to happen with specific tasks, and then dividing that up into reasonable steps. And then you execute that one step at a time, and then as you go, you ask for help and advice as needed. So it really doesn't need to be overly complicated. Approach it like you do any other project. Determine the goal, backtrack what needs to happen, divide it up into reasonable steps, execute it one step at a time, and ask for help and advice as needed. And you are more than welcome to join my free Facebook group. It's called Photo Organizing Fun, and that is where you'll be able to ask me pretty much anything you want to know. And we can talk about exactly what needs to happen and how to go about it. So there is help and advice out there for you if you need it, but just approach it like any other project and you'll be just fine. A lot of the time, what separates the students that succeed from the ones that don't, at least in my business, I've seen this, it's that they take action and they learn by doing. And the ones that sort of sit back and say, oh, I need to learn this and this and this and this before I start, it takes a lot longer and they don't get as far because it feels too daunting, it feels too overwhelming. So I really just want you to focus on one outcome at a time and decide on taking an action step towards that. You know, we don't need to run a marathon the first day, right? It's enough to put your shoes on and go for a walk. So I hope that makes sense. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions on what should happen first. Sometimes that comes up too. But again, I would say storage, definitely number one. I would say scanning for printed photos is and conversion for media. That should definitely be on the list at some point, just because that's another way to keep it safe. And then once we sort of have a hold and we can make sure that the originals are safe, then we can get to the organization part. There is something I do want to share with you, because since I am a professional organizer, I do have some tricks up my sleeve. Most organizers will follow a project management formula. And for me, that formula is gather, sort, edit, organize, review, and adjust. So I'm going to go over these with you, these steps. Step number one is always to gather everything in one place, right? And that holds true whether you're organizing clothes in your closet or whether you're organizing photos in a bin. You need to have everything in front of you to see what you're working with. That way you can see what you have, the formats, you can see how big it is, meaning the size of the collection. You can understand if it's in good condition or not, and you can kind of estimate the time and money the project will take. So that is always step one. And again, it doesn't matter what you're trying to organize, consolidation is always number one. Next is sorting. And then that really just means that we create some big general categories and we see what we have. And that lets your brain sort of process everything a little bit easier. And if you're working digitally, that can be done with a software automatically. So it doesn't necessarily need to be this huge, overwhelming task. If you're working with printed photos, it's a bit more of a manual step, but it can still be done. And that could be something simple like travel photos in one category, or holidays in another. Or you could do it by decade, or perhaps by size. So Polaroids in one, slides in one. A lot of the times I do like to start with the format, because sometimes if you're scanning, the formats need to be handled in different machines, right? So if you just put all the negatives in one spot, all the slides in one spot, all the printed photos in one spot, and then we can further sort of organize and subcategorize from that if you need to. But it doesn't need to be this big, overwhelming task. It can actually be pretty quickly done. Step 3 is to curate, meaning we want to look at the quality over quantity, and we want to take away anything that we don't need. So duplicates, bad angles, blurry photos, bursts, photos that don't tell a story. And again, if you're working digitally, a lot of that can happen automatically. So there are ways to do this where it doesn't need to be this big, overwhelming task. If you're working with printed photos, it's just a matter of picking one category at a time and looking at the photos and saying, you know what, do I really need this? Are there some duplicates here that I can give to a relative? Sometimes we find clients who have a lot of duplicates, for example, of wedding photos and birthdays and vacations and graduations and things like that, where the person in question who got married or graduated doesn't actually have those photos. So it can just be a matter of taking those and handing them over to that person, and that could make somebody's day. So just curating and sitting down and thinking about, what do I actually need to keep here? You don't need to keep everything. Sometimes as family historians, we tend to hold on to every little bit of evidence that could prove a point. We don't need to do that. If you have a vacation section, for example, like a group of photos where you went on vacation and you have 40 images of just the ocean, pick the best one or two, but that's all you need. You don't need all those 40. That's just more to manage. So feel free to toss some of that stuff out and don't feel guilty about it. You're actually helping your collection more because you're celebrating the masterpieces instead of letting those be obscured sort of or be mixed up with all the other clutter. You don't see artists in a gallery hanging all of their drafts on the wall. Writers don't put all their drafts on the wall. They have one that is the masterpiece, and think about, having that sort of museum attitude of, is this my masterpiece? Yeah, if so, keep that one, and let's let go of the other stuff that we don't need. And then step 4 of the organizing formula is actually to organize. So again, that just comes down to deciding how you'd like to find your photos, or whatever it is that you happen to be organizing. So for photos, we have keywords, file renaming, rating systems, locations, facial recognition, albums, collections, and so on. There are many ways to organize photos. Could you do all? Sure. People like me who really get a kick out of this stuff, we tend to do a lot of these things, but you absolutely don't need to do all of those things. You could do a couple of albums and be done. You could do a couple of keywords and be done. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. And so don't necessarily worry about that too much, because I think by the time you get to that step, you kind of have an idea of what you want to do. And step number 5 is really just hindsight, meaning that eventually we want to get to a point where our system is working. We want to just review it every now and then just to evaluate if it's still working, if there's anything that needs to be updated, and what changes you can make to be more efficient. And usually that has to do with new technology coming into our lives. So, did you switch to a new phone? Did you buy a new computer? And are there any changes we need to do based on that? So just periodically, once a year, just look over your system, make sure it's still working for you. And then obviously step number 6, which is the last step, is to adjust that. Anything that needs fixing, fix it. So if there's a tech update or a new device or a new organizing method that might have come out that you want to try, go ahead and actually adjust the workflow of what you're doing. And I know that was just the sort of quick bird's eye overview. So feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have about that. I just wanted to sort of give you that little project management formula so that you can get started and get going a little bit. And a lot of the time, the minute you take action, you'll start to learn. And if you just troubleshoot little by little, you'll be just fine. But please reach out to me if you have any questions on this. I have many more resources on my website at organizingphotos.net. So stop by over there and say hi. I also, like I said, have a free Facebook group called Photo Organizing Fun that you are welcome to join and ask questions about your project. And if you live elsewhere, you can go to the Photo Managers, which is our association, at thephotomanagers.com, and you can find a certified photo organizer that's near you that may be able to help you. So I hope that was very helpful. I thank you so much for listening to this. And again, if I can help you with anything, please reach out to me. You can find me online. Just Google the Swedish Organizer and I will pop up. All right. Thank you so much.